The neon sign of Mel's Route 66 diner flickered weakly against the desert night, buzzing like an exhausted firefly. It was almost midnight, and the parking lot shimmered under the pale orange glow of the streetlights. Inside, the air smelled of coffee, bacon grease, and rain-soaked asphalt, drifting in from the open window by the counter. Laura Henderson wiped down a booth, humming softly to a country song playing on the jukebox. Her name tag was slightly crooked, her apron stained with the rhythm of long nights and longer dreams. She was 28, a single mother working her third night shift of the week, her eyes heavy but her spirit determined. At home, her son Ethan was asleep, tucked under a quilt his grandmother had made. Laura had promised she'd be home by sunrise to make pancakes before school. It was a promise she fully intended to keep. "Long night, huh?" called out Pete, the cook, flipping a burger behind the counter, his grey hair stuck to his forehead with sweat. "Yeah," Laura replied, forcing a smile. "Feels longer when the jukebox keeps skipping." Pete chuckled. "You should have gone home hours ago." "Double shift," she said, pouring coffee for the only customer left, a trucker with tired eyes and a denim jacket. He barely looked up as he stirred in sugar. The bell above the diner's door jingled as wind swept in, carrying the scent of desert dust and gasoline. Outside, Route 66 stretched endlessly, empty and glowing under the full moon. Albuquerque's skyline blinked faintly in the distance, like a memory trying to hold on. At 12:37 a.m., Laura finished wiping the counter. "That's it for me," she said to Pete, untying her apron. "You lock up after the last one?" "Yeah," Pete nodded. "Drive safe, kid. That road gets lonely after midnight." She smiled, sliding her tips into her purse, unaware those words would echo for decades. Outside, the air had cooled, the hum of cicadas mixed with the faint sound of a radio from the trucker's rig. Laura walked toward her car, the headlights of passing semis slicing through the dark. Her old blue Chevy squeaked as she opened the door. She paused, glanced back at the diner's glowing windows, and for a moment, something in her expression shifted. Hesitation, maybe, or intuition. Then she drove off into the desert night. By morning, her car would be found 2 blocks away, engine off, door slightly ajar, purse on the passenger seat. No signs of struggle, no trace of Laura Henderson. In the days that followed, the story would spread through Albuquerque like wildfire. Neighbors whispering at grocery stores, reporters crowding near the diner, police combing through the desert. But that night, for a few brief moments, she was just a mother trying to make ends meet, a woman who still believed in better tomorrows. And when the jukebox played her favorite song hours later, Pete looked up from the grill and realized she hadn't come back for her coat. He stared at the empty doorway, an unease curling in his chest that he couldn't explain. Her disappearance would haunt the town for nearly 4 decades. If you want to follow more real stories that reveal hidden truths from America's forgotten past, subscribe to our channel and stay with us, because this story is only beginning. Morning came with the pale light of the desert sun creeping over the sandier mountains, casting long shadows across the quiet streets of Albuquerque. By the time the sun reached the flat rooftops of the diners and motels along Central Avenue, the news had already spread. A waitress, young, kind, mother of one, had vanished after her shift. In small towns and city corners alike, bad news traveled fast. At Mel's Route 66 diner, the familiar smell of coffee and bacon filled the air, but it felt different, heavier. The usual laughter of morning regulars was replaced by uneasy murmurs. "You heard about Laura?" someone asked in a low voice near the counter. Another replied, "They found her car, didn't they? 2 blocks from here." The words hung like smoke in the air. Sheriff Ray Delgado arrived mid-morning, his boots coated in desert dust. He was a man who had seen enough crime scenes to know when something didn't add up, but this one left him uneasy. Laura Henderson wasn't the type to vanish. Her reputation around town was clean, devoted mother, hard worker, polite to everyone. Delgado's gut told him this wasn't a simple runaway case. "Pete," he said, walking up to the counter, "you were working last night?" The cook nodded, his eyes red from lack of sleep. "She clocked out after midnight, said she was heading home. Never saw her again." "Anyone stop by after that?" Delgado asked, scribbling in his notepad. Just one trucker, Pete said, frowning. Didn't catch his name. Quiet guy. Coffee, 2 sugars, paid cash. Delgado made a note. Cash meant no trace. Outside, reporters began gathering, their microphones catching the morning wind. The neon sign above the diner buzzed faintly, as if it too shared the town's nervous pulse. Martha Henderson, Laura's mother, stood by the edge of the parking lot, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her face was pale but fierce, the kind of strength carved by years of hardship. "You people better find my daughter," she said sharply when Delgado approached. Her voice didn't shake. "She wouldn't just walk away. She's got a boy at home." Delgado nodded. "We're doing everything we can, ma'am." "That's what you said last year when that girl went missing near the highway," Martha replied. "And they never found her either." The sheriff had no answer. He looked at the empty road stretching toward the horizon, where the heat already shimmered. Albuquerque in the 80s was a mix of bright lights and dark corners, bars that stayed open too late, truck stops filled with strangers just passing through, and neighborhoods where people kept their curtains drawn. By afternoon, flyers with Laura's picture were stapled to telephone poles and taped to diner doors. "Missing," the bold letters read above her smiling face. Ethan's schoolteacher wept when she saw it. At the sheriff's office, Delgado's deputy brought in a stack of statements. "Nothing solid," he said. "No one saw her leave. A couple of customers said she looked tired, that's all." Delgado leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his stubbled chin. "People don't just disappear, not like that," he muttered. But in New Mexico, the desert could hide secrets for a long, long time. As night fell again over the glowing strip of Route 66, the townsfolk locked their doors a little earlier. Mothers called their daughters to check in, and husbands told their wives not to drive alone after dark. Fear settled over Albuquerque, not loud or dramatic, but quiet, creeping, like sand filling the cracks of an old building. And somewhere beyond the glow of the city, the desert waited, silent and patient, holding its secret. Sheriff Ray Delgado stood beside Laura Henderson's abandoned Chevy, the morning sun turning the metal a dull, ghostly blue. The car door was unlocked. Her purse sat neatly on the passenger seat, wallet still inside. It looked as if she had just stepped out for a minute and never come back. Delgado crouched to inspect the ground, tire marks, footprints that led nowhere. The desert wind had already started erasing them. "Anything?" asked Deputy Collins, notebook in hand. "Nothing useful," Delgado said, straightening. "No sign of a struggle, no blood, no keys." He exhaled, long and slow. "It's like she vanished into thin air." Collins hesitated. "You think she ran off?" Delgado shot him a look. "She's got a kid at home." She didn't run off. Back at the station, the air buzzed with the hum of ceiling fans and the ringing of phones. Delgado pinned Laura's photo to the bulletin board beside other unsolved cases. He hated that board. It reminded him of every person he'd failed to find. Still, something about Laura's case felt different, cleaner, quieter. Whoever was behind this knew what they were doing. He gathered his small team. "We start with the diner," he said. "Talk to everyone who worked that night and every customer who stopped by. Someone saw something. They just don't know it yet." By noon, he was back at Mel's Route 66 diner. The jukebox played softly, out of place against the low murmur of police radios. Pete wiped his hands on a towel, his face pale. "I told you everything, Sheriff." "She left just after midnight." "What about that trucker?" Delgado pressed. "Anyone recognize him?" Pete shook his head. "Never seen him before, but he acted strange. Quiet, but not shy. Kept watching the clock." Delgado jotted the detail down. "What was he driving?" "Big rig, red cab, maybe Kenworth or Peterbilt. Couldn't tell the company name." He parked near the edge of the lot where the light doesn't reach. That stuck with Delgado. The diner's parking lights barely reached 50 feet into the dark. Beyond that, it was all desert, a perfect hiding place. He sent 2 deputies to nearby truck stops, showing Laura's picture to anyone who'd listen. Most shrugged, a few shook their heads. Truckers came and went, faces blending like dust clouds on the horizon. At sunset, Delgado visited Martha Henderson. Her small house smelled of lavender and old wood. Ethan sat quietly at the kitchen table, drawing with crayons. When Delgado stepped in, the boy looked up, his eyes wide and searching. "Did you find my mom?" he asked. Delgado's throat tightened. "Not yet, son." "But we're looking everywhere." Martha's voice cut through the stillness. "She didn't just disappear," she said. "Someone took her. She wouldn't leave her boy." Delgado nodded. "We'll find out what happened. I promise." She stared at him, her jaw set. Promises don't bring people home. As he drove back toward town, the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky a deep crimson. Delgado felt the familiar pull of doubt creeping in. He'd been sheriff long enough to know the desert had its own way of swallowing secrets, but he couldn't let this one fade into another cold file. That night, he sat in his office long after everyone had gone home, flipping through reports. The red cab, the empty lot, the missing woman, it all swirled in his mind. Somewhere among the ordinary details lay the key. He just had to find it before time buried it for good. Outside, the desert wind howled softly, carrying the faint echo of a jukebox song from the diner down the road. The days after Laura Henderson's disappearance moved like syrup, slow, heavy, and suffocating. The police cars stopped coming as often. The reporters drifted away. But inside the small yellow house on Lomas Boulevard, time had frozen. The kitchen still smelled faintly of her perfume, the lavender one she wore on Sundays. Her coffee mug sat untouched beside the sink, the lipstick mark fading like a memory that refused to stay. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, his legs too short to touch the floor. His crayons lay scattered beside a half-finished drawing, a stick-figure family under a crooked sun. Every morning he asked the same question. "Grandma, when's Mum coming home?" Martha's heart broke a little more each time. "Soon, baby," she said, her voice trembling with the weight of disbelief. "She's just working late, that's all." But even Ethan could see through the lie now. The boy had stopped sleeping through the night. Sometimes he'd sneak to the living room window, hoping to see his mother's car pull into the driveway. Once, he thought he heard her voice in the wind, whispering his name, but when he opened the door, only silence answered. Martha tried to hold the house together. Bills piled on the counter, the phone rang with sympathy calls, and casseroles arrived from neighbors who meant well but never stayed long. She felt their pity like a shadow she couldn't shake. Each night, she sat by the phone waiting for news, clutching Laura's photo, her thumb brushing the edge where the paper had started to crease. Sheriff Delgado visited twice that week. His hat in his hands, eyes tired, voice low. "We're following every lead," he told her, but Martha could see the defeat behind his words. "She's not just another case, Ray," she said, her tone sharp, her grief turning to anger. "That's my daughter. You find her." Delgado nodded, guilt threading through his chest. "I will," he said softly. But as he walked out into the dry evening air, he wasn't sure he believed himself anymore. At school, Ethan became quieter. Teachers watched him draw pictures of cars and roads, always with a small figure standing alone beside them. One afternoon, his teacher, Mrs. Kelly, knelt beside his desk. "That's a beautiful drawing, Ethan," she said gently. "It's my mom," he replied without looking up. "She's lost, but the sheriff's gonna find her." Mrs. Kelly smiled weakly. "He's trying his best." Ethan didn't respond. He pressed his crayon harder until it snapped in half. By winter, the search had gone cold. Posters of Laura faded on street corners, the ink washed away by rain and wind. The world moved on, but for Martha and Ethan the clock never reset. Every sound, every creak of the floorboards made them pause. Hope had become a cruel visitor, showing up uninvited, staying just long enough to remind them what they'd lost. One night, after Ethan had finally fallen asleep clutching his mother's sweater, Martha sat on the porch watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Delgado's patrol car passed by, headlights flashing across her face. She didn't wave. She just whispered into the night, "Bring her home." Inside, the television played a country song Laura used to hum while cooking breakfast. The sound filled the empty house, echoing down the hallway like a ghost of happier times. And though no one said it aloud, both Martha and the boy knew deep down that something terrible had happened. and that nothing in their lives would ever be the same again. The years rolled forward like dust across the desert, slow, relentless, indifferent. By the late 1990s, the world had changed around Albuquerque. New shops rose where old motels once stood, and Route 66 traded neon lights for cracked asphalt and fading memories. But for Martha and Ethan Henderson, time stood still. Laura's photo still hung above the fireplace, her smile frozen, her eyes forever waiting. Ethan was 17 now, tall, restless, carrying the same sharp blue eyes his mother once had. The house felt too small, too quiet, suffocating under the weight of years without answers. Every creak in the floor reminded him of the night she disappeared. Every knock at the door made him hope, just for a second, that maybe, somehow, she'd come back. He came home late one evening, the smell of cigarette smoke clinging to his jacket. Martha was waiting at the kitchen table, her grey hair pulled into a bun, a half-empty cup of coffee in front of her. "You missed dinner," she said, her tone calm but heavy. "I wasn't hungry," Ethan replied, avoiding her eyes. "You were out with those boys again, weren't you?" "Yeah, so what? Do you want me to sit here and stare at her picture all night like you do?" The words came out sharper than he meant. Regret flashed in his eyes, but Martha didn't flinch. "She was your mother, Ethan. Don't you dare talk about her like that." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I just can't do this anymore, Grandma. It's been 12 years. She's gone, and nobody's gonna find her." Martha's lips trembled, but her voice stayed firm. "You don't stop hoping. Not ever. The day you do, you lose her for good." He wanted to believe her, but belief had become a luxury he couldn't afford. That night, he sat on the hood of his old Chevy, staring at the stars over the desert. Somewhere out there, beneath all that darkness, was the truth. He could feel it, like a pulse beneath the sand. But the world had long since moved on. The police had changed hands, Sheriff Delgado had retired, and the Henderson file sat in a dusty drawer in a county office no one visited anymore. Delgado still carried the case in his mind, though. From time to time, he'd pull the folder from his filing cabinet, spreading its yellowed pages across his kitchen table. Photographs, reports, names, none of them had changed, but the questions still gnawed at him. What did they miss? Where had she gone? Meanwhile, Ethan started skipping school, drifting between jobs, searching for meaning in a town that only reminded him of loss. Martha watched him from the porch each morning, her eyes tired but unyielding. She saw Laura in him, the same defiance, the same fire, but also the same loneliness. By 1999, the house felt quieter than ever. The radio played old songs Laura used to hum, but the sound only deepened the ache. Martha's hands shook when she folded laundry. Some days she forgot what year it was. Other days she remembered everything too clearly. Ethan came home one night to find her asleep in the armchair, the television flickering across her face. On her lap lay Laura's photo, edges curled, colors faded. For a long moment, he just stood there, the air thick with everything left unsaid. He whispered, "I'll find out what happened, Mom. I swear I will." Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain over the desert. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled softly, like a promise yet to be fulfilled. It was late summer in Albuquerque when the desert finally gave up one of its secrets. A construction crew working on a new stretch of road outside town hit something solid beneath the dirt. At first, they thought it was just another rock, until the foreman picked it up and saw a flash of silver through the dust. It was a bracelet, tarnished but intact, engraved with a single word on the inside: Laura. Within hours, the county sheriff's office was on site. The crew watched from their trucks as deputies marked off the area with yellow tape. The air shimmered with heat, the scent of hot tar and dry sage clinging to every breath. "Looks old," one deputy murmured, placing the bracelet into an evidence bag. Sheriff Watkins, new to the job and younger than Delgado had been, examined it closely. "Run it through the database," he said. "See if it connects to any missing persons." It didn't take long. Within a day, the report came back: Laura Henderson, missing since 1986. The news spread through Albuquerque like a gust of hot wind. For most, it was a name buried in old newspaper clippings, but for a few, it was a scar reopening after years of silence. At her small house near Central Avenue, Martha Henderson received the call from the sheriff's office. Her hands trembled so hard she nearly dropped the phone. "You're sure?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Yes, ma'am," came the reply. "It's been confirmed. We're reopening the investigation." Martha hung up slowly. For a long moment she just stared at the wall where Laura's photo still hung, her heart caught between dread and hope. "Maybe now," she whispered, "they'll finally find you." The reopened case brought a new face into the story, Detective Lisa Carrington. She was in her early 30s, sharp-eyed, methodical, and determined. She'd studied forensic science at UNM and had a reputation for chasing down cold cases others ignored. When she held the bracelet in her gloved hands for the first time, she felt the weight of the past pressing through the metal. "This could be the thread we've been waiting for," she told her partner. The case files were dusty, handwritten, and incomplete. Some photos were so faded that faces were little more than shadows, but Lisa read every page, every statement. Sheriff Delgado's old notes caught her attention. The red truck, the unknown driver. The footprints erased by wind. "Why didn't they test anything for DNA?" she muttered. Her partner raised an eyebrow. "It was the 80s, Lisa. DNA testing was barely a thing back then." Lisa leaned back in her chair, determination hardening her expression. "Then we'll test it now." She sent the bracelet to the state lab for trace analysis, hoping some fragment of evidence had survived the decades. She also contacted the old sheriff, now retired and living quietly near Santa Fe. Delgado answered after the third ring, his voice raspy with age but instantly alert when she said Laura Henderson's name. "I always knew she'd find her way back," he said softly. "The desert doesn't forget, it just waits." Lisa asked if he'd be willing to consult. "I'll help," Delgado said, "but be careful. Cases like this, they wake ghosts." As she drove back through the dusty New Mexico twilight, Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was still out there, watching. The road stretched ahead, empty except for the hum of her tires and the faint glimmer of the bracelet on the seat beside her, catching the last light of the dying sun. When Ethan Henderson crossed the New Mexico state line for the first time in years, the landscape looked smaller than he remembered. The open desert stretched endlessly, but the colors felt muted now, washed out by time and memory. His old Chevy pickup rattled as it rolled down the highway toward Albuquerque, the radio humming low beneath the roar of the wind. He hadn't planned to come back, not after all those years of trying to forget. But when the call came about the bracelet, he couldn't ignore it. Martha's voice on the phone had been frail, trembling with hope. "They found something, Ethan," she'd said. "It's hers." He'd driven all night after that. Now, as the Sandia Mountains rose in the distance, he realized how much the city had changed and how much he hadn't. The Henderson house was still there, though smaller somehow, weathered by decades of sun and silence. Martha met him at the door, her frame thinner, her eyes softer. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she reached for his hand. "You came," she whispered. "Of course I did," he said quietly. "You think I'd stay away after that call?" Inside, the house was frozen in time. Laura's photo still hung in the hallway, the edges yellowed but her smile undimmed. The faint smell of lavender lingered, though Ethan knew it was just his mind playing tricks. He walked through the rooms slowly, each one heavy with ghosts. "They reopened the case," Martha said, following him into the kitchen. "A new detective. Carrington, I think. She came by yesterday." Ethan nodded. "Did she say what they found?" "Just the bracelet. Said they're testing it for DNA." He exhaled, leaning against the counter. "You really think they'll find anything after all this time?" Martha's lips pressed into a thin line. "You stopped believing a long time ago." "I never did." That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. The city outside the window buzzed faintly, but his mind stayed trapped in the past. He saw flashes, his mother's smile, the sound of her humming, the night he waited by the window for her headlights to appear. He hadn't let himself think about that night in years. The next morning he drove to the sheriff's office. The receptionist eyed him curiously. when he asked for Detective Lisa Carrington. Moments later she appeared, a tall woman with sharp brown eyes and a calm intensity that filled the room. "Ethan Henderson," she said, extending her hand. "I've been expecting you." He shook it. "You're the one working my mother's case." She nodded. "I am. And I'm glad you came. There's something about cold cases. Sometimes family members remember details that never made it into the reports." He hesitated. "You really think there's still a chance?" "I don't chase ghosts, Mr. Henderson," she said evenly. "I chase truth, and your mother deserves that." Her confidence unsettled him. For the first time in years, someone spoke about his mother not as a lost soul, but as a person who mattered. They talked for nearly an hour. Ethan recounted what little he remembered: the car, the house, the endless questions. Lisa took notes, her expression thoughtful. Before he left, she said, "I want to show you something tomorrow. It's better you see it for yourself." Ethan looked at her, uncertain. "What is it?" She paused, her eyes steady on his. "The place where the bracelet was found." As he stepped out into the desert sunlight, a strange feeling stirred inside him, a mix of dread and something else he hadn't felt in years: hope. The next morning dawned pale and windless, the kind of morning that felt like the world was holding its breath. Ethan drove out to meet Detective Lisa Carrington at the edge of the construction site where the bracelet had been found. The air shimmered with heat already rising from the ground, the desert stretching endlessly around them. Lisa was standing near a cluster of survey flags, her hair pulled back, sunglasses hiding the sharp focus in her eyes. When Ethan stepped out of his truck, she handed him a bottle of water and nodded toward the open earth. "Right there," she said. "That's where the bracelet was. No other personal items, no human remains, just this." Ethan crouched, staring at the disturbed dirt. His throat tightened. "She must have dropped it," he murmured, "or someone took it off her." Lisa watched him carefully. "Maybe. Either way, it puts her out here that night, or someone connected to her." He stood, brushing his hands against his jeans. "It's been 39 years, Detective. You really think someone still remembers something?" She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "Sometimes people don't talk because they're scared. Sometimes they just need to be asked the right way." That afternoon, Lisa combed through the old witness statements again, reading each line as if it were new. One name appeared near the bottom: Dolores Mendez, waitress, night shift. Interviewed once, vague memory, nothing conclusive. But something about her wording caught Lisa's attention. "I thought I saw Laura talking to someone outside, maybe a customer. Could have been a trucker." Lisa found her address, now a retirement complex off Central Avenue. She called Ethan. "There's someone I need you to meet," she said. Dolores Mendez was in her 70s, her grey hair pulled into a bun, her eyes sharp behind thick glasses. When Lisa introduced Ethan, the woman froze, her breath catching. "You look just like her," she said softly. "Like Laura." Ethan's chest tightened. "You worked with my mum." Dolores nodded slowly. "We were close. She was a sweet girl. Always tired, always talking about that boy of hers." Her voice quivered. "I've thought about that night for years." Lisa leaned forward. "Mrs. Mendez, you mentioned once you saw someone with her outside the diner. Do you remember who?" The old woman hesitated, her hands trembling as she reached for her teacup. "It's been so long. But yes, I think I do. There was a man. He used to come in a lot, always sat at the same counter seat. Quiet, polite. Never said much, but he watched her. You could tell." Ethan frowned. "Do you remember his name?" She shook her head. "No name, but I remember his jacket. A dark denim one with a patch on the shoulder, some kind of trucking company logo. He'd park his rig near the back where the lights didn't reach." Lisa's pen stopped mid-note. "Did you ever tell the sheriff that?" Dolores nodded faintly. "I did, but they said they couldn't trace it. Too many drivers, not enough evidence. After a while I just stopped talking about it. People didn't like when you asked too many questions back then." Ethan looked at her, a mix of gratitude and frustration swirling in his chest. "Why tell us now?" The old woman met his gaze, eyes glistening. "Because I see your mother's face every time I close my eyes." "I should have spoken louder when I had the chance." Lisa placed a hand gently over hers. "You're speaking now, and it matters." Dolores nodded. "There's one more thing. He always paid cash, but he left big tips, like he was trying to buy something that wasn't for sale." Ethan swallowed hard. "You think he's still out there?" Dolores looked out the window toward the fading light. "Men like that never really leave," she whispered. Detective Lisa Carrington couldn't shake the image of the denim jacket with the company patch. That single detail clung to her thoughts like desert dust. Back at the precinct, she spread the old case files across her desk again, determined to trace what decades of neglect had buried. When she cross-referenced trucking companies that operated near Albuquerque in 1986, one name surfaced repeatedly: Morel Freight Lines. She tapped her pen against the table, a steady rhythm that mirrored her heartbeat. "Morel," she muttered under her breath. "That's something." Within hours, she was on the phone with the Department of Transportation, digging through old employment records. Most of the names were long gone, retired, deceased, or moved out of state. But one driver stood out: Hank Morel, the owner's son. He had been on a long-haul route through New Mexico during the week Laura vanished. Ethan sat across from her desk, watching her flip through papers. "You think this guy Morel had something to do with my mom?" Lisa didn't answer immediately. "I think he was there," she said finally, "and I think he's the first real lead this case has had in 39 years. She found an address listed in the updated records, a property north of town near Rio Rancho. According to public data, Hank Morel now owned a small auto repair shop and lived quietly with his second wife. No criminal record, no signs of trouble." Still, something about that calm normalcy set her on edge. When Lisa and Ethan arrived at the shop that afternoon, the air was thick with the smell of oil and heat. An old country song crackled from a radio inside the garage. Hank was under the hood of a pickup, his hands blackened with grease. He looked up as they approached, his expression unreadable. His hair was silver now, but his frame was still solid, his posture steady. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice gravelly. Lisa showed her badge. "Detective Carrington, Bernalillo County Sheriff's Department. This is Ethan Henderson." The name seemed to flicker behind Hank's eyes. "Henderson," he repeated slowly. "That name's familiar." Ethan's jaw tightened. "It should be. My mother, Laura Henderson, disappeared in 1986. You used to stop by Mel's Diner back then." Hank wiped his hands on a rag, his gaze steady. "Lots of truckers stopped there. Good coffee. Cheap pie." Lisa studied him carefully. "We're revisiting the case. Thought you might remember something." He shrugged. "That was a long time ago, Detective." Faces blur together, but his tone carried something else, an edge, faint but deliberate. Ethan took a step closer. "You watched her. People saw you." Hank's eyes darkened. "Careful, son. You're throwing around big accusations." Lisa placed a hand on Ethan's arm, keeping her voice calm. "We're not accusing anyone, Mr. Morel. Just asking questions." Hank tossed the rag onto the counter. "Then ask your questions. I've got nothing to hide." Lisa held up a photo, Laura's smiling face captured in faded color. "You ever see her outside the diner? Maybe that night?" He glanced at it, then looked away. "I might have. She was friendly to everyone. You cops still digging this up after all these years?" "Some things don't stay buried," Lisa said quietly. For a moment, silence filled the space between them. The hum of the radio, the buzz of a fly against the window, the faint hiss of an air compressor, all ordinary sounds, yet the tension made them feel magnified. Finally, Hank said, "You're wasting your time, Detective." He turned back to his truck. "Some people just leave. You should let the dead rest." Ethan's fists clenched, but Lisa guided him toward the door. "He's hiding something," Ethan muttered once they were outside. Lisa nodded. "Yes, and we're going to find out what." Behind them, Hank watched through the dusty glass, the reflection of his own face staring back at him. His jaw tightened, and for the first time in years, his hands trembled. Detective Lisa Carrington replayed the encounter with Hank Morell over and over in her mind as she sat alone in the precinct that night. His calmness bothered her, the way he never asked why she'd come, the way his eyes darted when he saw Laura's picture. It wasn't guilt exactly, but something colder, something practiced. She flipped through the files again, tracing his old trucking routes from 1986. Each trip mapped across New Mexico like a trail of ghosts. At the center of it all was Albuquerque. Every route, every stop circled back there. She called the state lab to check on the DNA analysis from the bracelet. The technician on the other end sounded cautious. "Detective Carrington, we found something," he said. "There's degraded material, small but usable. We ran it through the system. We got a hit." Lisa straightened in her chair. "From who?" "A partial match to Hank Morell." The words hit her like a sudden gust of desert wind. "You're certain?" "Low probability of error," the technician said. "But it's enough to warrant follow-up." When she hung up, her heart was pounding. After nearly 4 decades, there was finally proof, something tangible, something real. But she knew better than to rush. Evidence was only as strong as the case built around it, and Hank Morell had money, lawyers, and a spotless public image. The next morning, she drove to Ethan's house. He opened the door, bleary-eyed but alert, like he'd been expecting her. "You found something," he said, not as a question but as a statement. Lisa hesitated for a moment before nodding. "The DNA on your mother's bracelet. It links to Morell." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You're telling me the man who sat there lying to my face is the one who—" "I'm telling you we have to be careful," Lisa interrupted. "It's partial DNA, not conclusive. If we go at him without backup, he'll shut down and we'll lose him." Ethan's voice shook. "You said you chased truth, not ghosts." "Well, that's the truth, isn't it?" Lisa met his gaze, steady but empathetic. "It's a start. But truth isn't justice until it holds up in court." He turned away, running a hand through his hair. "Then what do we do?" "We build the rest," she said. "Every piece we can find." That afternoon, Lisa called Ray Delgado. His voice on the line was rough with age, but still carried authority. "I heard the rumors," he said. "You finally got something?" "We've got a link," Lisa replied. "But we need context, something that puts him near her that night." Delgado exhaled heavily. "There was always something off about that man. He came in for questioning once back then, said he was just passing through. I never bought it." "Do you still have your notes?" Lisa asked. "Every damn one," he said. "I'll dig them up." By evening, she had a copy of Delgado's old notebook in her hands. The handwriting was cramped and uneven, but one line stood out. "Truck identified by partial plate 7KP, red cab. Witness saw it parked behind the diner after midnight." Morell's old registration records confirmed it. His rig matched the description exactly. Lisa stared at the papers spread across her table, the connections forming like constellations in the dark. The bracelet, the DNA, the truck. Each fragment of evidence had waited decades to be found, but now they fit, piece by piece. Ethan called just before midnight. His voice was quiet, almost reverent. "You think this is it?" "I think we're close," she said. Outside, the wind moved through the desert brush, carrying the faint scent of rain. It sounded almost like a whisper, of truth, of justice, of a secret finally stirring after too long in the dark. The morning was overcast when Detective Lisa Carrington received an unexpected call. The woman on the other end spoke in a low, uncertain voice. "My name's Ruth Morell," she said. "I was married to Hank. We divorced in '92. I think I have something you need to see." Within an hour, Lisa was on her way to a modest house on the outskirts of Rio Rancho. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place where people watered their lawns at the same time every day and avoided asking too many questions. Ruth answered the door wrapped in a light cardigan, her eyes wary but resolute. "I've carried this secret too long," she said. "Come in." Inside, the living room smelled faintly of old books and cigarette smoke. On the coffee table lay a small wooden box. Ruth opened it with trembling hands and pulled out a folded, yellowed envelope. The handwriting across the front was unmistakably masculine, sharp, deliberate. "He gave me this after we split," she said softly. "Told me to burn it, but I never could." Lisa slipped on a pair of gloves before taking the envelope. "You read it?" "Once," Ruth admitted. "I didn't understand it then. But when I saw the news about that bracelet last week, I knew." Lisa unfolded the paper carefully. The ink had faded, but the words were clear enough. "That night on Route 66 still eats at me." She wouldn't stop crying. "I didn't mean for things to go that far, it just happened too fast. I buried the truth like I buried her, and every day since it's been rotting inside me." Lisa's breath caught. There was no signature, but it didn't need one. The tone, the reference, it was unmistakably Hank Morell. She looked up at Ruth, who was staring at her hands. "I asked him about it once," Ruth said, her voice shaking. "He got angry, said it was just a story he made up to get something off his chest. But I saw the way he looked at me, that wasn't fiction." Lisa steadied her voice. "Do you mind if I take this as evidence?" Ruth nodded. "It's time someone did." Later that day, Lisa met Ethan at the sheriff's office. He was pacing the hallway when she arrived. One look at her face, and he froze. "What is it?" he asked. She held up the envelope. "A letter from Morell to his ex-wife. It's bad." Ethan's voice dropped. "Bad how?" Lisa hesitated. "He confessed, at least partially. He wrote about a woman on Route 66 who wouldn't stop crying. He said he buried her." For a long moment Ethan just stood there, his eyes unfocused, his breathing shallow. "So it's real," he whispered. All this time he knew. Lisa placed the letter on the desk between them. "We'll authenticate it, test the paper, the ink. If it holds up, it could break the case wide open." He stared at the words, as if they might vanish. "He's been living free for almost 40 years, Detective. How do you live with something like that?" Lisa met his eyes. "Some people don't live with it. They just hide from it." Ethan nodded slowly, anger simmering beneath the surface. "Then let's make sure he can't hide anymore." Outside, dark clouds gathered over the desert horizon, rolling in with the promise of rain. Lisa looked out the window, the letter still burning in her thoughts. After decades of silence, the truth had finally begun to speak, and its voice was damning. The storm that had been building over Albuquerque finally broke the next morning, rain streaking across the sheriff's office windows in gray lines. Detective Lisa Carrington stood at her desk, watching the drops trace paths down the glass as she rehearsed the steps in her mind. The letter, the DNA, the old truck logs, they were enough. It was time. Sheriff Watkins walked in, holding a signed warrant. "Judge approved it," he said, setting the paper down. "You sure about this, Carrington?" Lisa nodded. "He's had 39 years of freedom he never deserved." Ethan arrived a few minutes later, soaked from the rain. He looked restless, hands clenched in the pockets of his jacket. "You're really doing it?" he asked. "We're doing it," Lisa replied. "But you stay here. This isn't your fight to take into your own hands." He didn't argue, but his silence spoke volumes. By mid-morning, Lisa and a team of deputies pulled up outside Hank Morell's auto shop. The sky hung low and heavy, thunder rumbling in the distance. Hank was there as always, tightening bolts under the hood of a car, radio humming an old country tune. When the patrol lights flashed against the rain-soaked ground, he looked up, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Morell," Lisa called out, her voice steady, "you're under arrest for the 1986 disappearance of Laura Henderson." For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then Hank's eyes narrowed. "That's insane," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "You got no right dragging up lies from 40 years ago." Lisa stepped forward, her badge glinting in the grey light. "We have a letter in your handwriting describing what happened that night. We have a DNA match from the victim's bracelet. And we have testimony from witnesses who remember you being there." "You've run out of shadows to hide in." Hank's jaw tightened. "You think some old paper and half a hair strand mean anything?" He laughed, but it was hollow. "You don't have proof of a damn thing." "Maybe not enough to stop the rain," Lisa said, "but enough to stop you." When the deputies moved closer, Hank didn't resist. He raised his hands slowly, letting them cuff him. "You people don't know what you're doing," he muttered. "That woman was—" "Don't," Lisa cut in sharply. "Don't say her name like you ever cared." As they led him toward the patrol car, reporters began to appear, drawn by whispers that the old Route 66 case had finally cracked. Cameras flashed through the drizzle, voices shouted questions, but Lisa kept walking, the rain soaking her hair and uniform. Behind her, Hank Morell lowered his head as the car door shut. Back at the sheriff's office, word spread fast. Phones rang, journalists demanded statements, and townsfolk who still remembered Laura Henderson's smile called to say, "Thank you." Martha, frail but unbroken, watched the news from her living room, tears tracing silent paths down her cheeks. "They got him," she whispered to the photo above the mantel. "They finally got him." Ethan stood behind her, his face unreadable. For so long, he had imagined this moment, what it would feel like to see justice served. But instead of satisfaction, there was only a deep, quiet ache. "Does this mean it's over?" he asked. Martha turned to him. "No, honey," she said softly. "It means it's finally beginning." Across town, Lisa sat alone in her office, the warrant still on her desk, the letter sealed in an evidence bag beside it. The storm outside had started to clear, the first light breaking through the clouds. She stared at the gray horizon and whispered to herself, "You did it, Laura, we heard you." The courthouse in downtown Albuquerque buzzed with attention that felt almost electric. Reporters crowded the steps, their voices a low hum beneath the steady beat of camera shutters. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation. For many, this trial wasn't just about one woman's disappearance. It was about the town's collective wound, finally facing daylight after nearly 4 decades of silence. Ethan sat in the front row, hands clasped tightly in his lap. His grandmother's cane rested beside him, though she wasn't well enough to attend every session. He could still hear her voice from that morning. "Look at him, Ethan. Don't let him hide from what he did." At the defense table, Hank Morell sat stiffly in a dark suit, his once strong hands trembling slightly. His attorney, a polished man from Santa Fe, leaned close, whispering strategy. Across the aisle, Lisa Carrington reviewed her notes, the case file stacked neatly beside her. She had lived this investigation for years now, and yet as the judge entered, she felt the same chill she'd felt the day she first read Laura Henderson's name. The prosecutor, a composed woman named Diane Ruiz, began the state's opening remarks. "For 39 years, Laura Henderson's family lived without answers," she said, her voice steady but cutting. "Today, they will finally hear the truth. The evidence will show that Hank Morell was not a bystander. He was the last person seen with Laura alive, and his own words, his own handwriting, prove it." The defense countered quickly, claiming the letter was a fabrication, the DNA inconclusive, the witnesses unreliable. "We are not here to convict a man on sentiment," Morell's lawyer said smoothly. "We are here to uphold the standard of proof beyond reasonable doubt, and there is doubt, ladies and gentlemen, enough to fill the desert between here and that diner." When Dolores Mendez took the stand, her frail voice filled the courtroom. "I remember his face," she said, glancing toward Morell. "He used to sit at the counter watching her." "He wasn't there for the coffee," the defense pressed her. "Mrs. Mendez, this was almost 40 years ago. How can you be so sure?" She looked directly at the jury. "You don't forget the face of a man who gave you chills every time he smiled." Next came the forensic expert, explaining the DNA match on Laura's bracelet. "It's partial but statistically significant," the scientist said. "The chance it belongs to anyone other than the defendant is less than 1 in 10,000. Then the letter was introduced. Lisa watched as the prosecutor held it up for the jury. The courtroom went silent while the words were read aloud, Hank's confession of the night that haunted him. Even the defense couldn't mask the ripple that passed through the room. When it was time for Lisa to testify, she spoke with quiet precision. "This case haunted everyone who touched it," she said. "We followed every lead, every false start, but the truth was always waiting. It just needed someone to listen long enough." The defense tried to paint her as obsessed, but Lisa stayed calm. "If seeking justice for a murdered woman is obsession," she said, "then I'll live with that." After days of testimony, the courtroom fell silent as the jury deliberated. Hours passed. Ethan sat still, staring at the door, every second stretching like a lifetime. Finally, the foreman entered, holding the verdict slip. "On the charge of manslaughter in the death of Laura Henderson," he read, "we find the defendant guilty." A hush spread through the room, followed by quiet sobs from the back. Ethan closed his eyes, his fists unclenching for the first time in years. Hank Morell sat motionless, his jaw tight, eyes hollow. For the first time he looked small, just another man weighed down by the truth. The courtroom had emptied hours ago, but Ethan still sat there, staring at the empty chair where Hank Morell had once been. The echo of the gavel still rang in his ears. Guilty. 2 syllables that should have felt like victory, but instead carried the weight of exhaustion. For 39 years he had dreamed of this moment, yet now it felt hollow, almost quiet. Justice, he realized, didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered. When he finally stepped outside, the late afternoon sun broke through the clouds, painting the courthouse steps in gold. Reporters called his name, microphones flashing, but he barely heard them. He walked past them without a word, his thoughts drifting to the diner that had started it all. Mel's Route 66. Diner was closed now, the windows boarded, the neon sign long dark. Weeds pushed through the cracks in the parking lot. Ethan stood at the edge of the lot, listening to the faint hum of traffic from the highway. It had been nearly 4 decades, but the air still carried that same dry scent of dust and coffee. He closed his eyes and imagined his mother behind the counter again, smiling as she poured a cup for some weary traveler. For a fleeting moment, he almost heard her voice. Lisa Carrington arrived quietly, parking a few yards away. She walked up beside him, hands in her coat pockets. "You knew I'd come here," she said softly. He nodded. "You've been 2 steps ahead since the start," she smiled faintly. "It's strange, isn't it? You chase something for so long, and when you finally catch it, all that's left is silence." He looked at her. "Does it ever feel like it's not enough?" "All the time," she admitted. "But sometimes justice isn't about what we get. It's about what we stop from happening again." Ethan nodded slowly. "He only got manslaughter." Lisa's gaze lingered on the horizon. A guilty verdict is still a truth acknowledged. That's more than most families ever get. They stood there for a while, the desert wind sweeping across the empty lot. Ethan took a deep breath. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to hate this place. I thought if I ever came back, I'd burn it to the ground. But now, I think I'll leave it like this. Let it fade. Maybe that's how it should end." Lisa looked at him, her eyes thoughtful. "Maybe. Or maybe it's where something begins." That evening, Ethan visited his grandmother's house one last time. Martha sat by the window, her cane resting against the chair. The light from the television flickered across her face. When she saw him, she smiled faintly. "I saw it on the news," she said. "They said he'll serve time." Ethan knelt beside her. "Yeah, it's over, Grandma." She reached out, touching his cheek. "No, sweetheart. It's just peace now. That's all we ever needed." He held her hand, the years of grief softening at last. For the first time since he was a child, he didn't feel anger pressing on his chest. Only quiet. Only the ache of release. Later, as he stood on the porch, the desert night stretched before him, vast, endless, familiar. Somewhere in the distance, a train's whistle echoed through the darkness. It was a lonely sound, but it didn't scare him anymore. He whispered into the wind, "We found you, Mom." Behind him, the lights of Albuquerque flickered softly, as if the city itself were exhaling after holding its breath for far too long. The desert was quiet that morning, the air still and cool, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush after a night of rain. Ethan drove slowly along the old highway, the same stretch his mother had once traveled so many years ago. The road shimmered in the early light, endless and familiar, like a thread connecting past and present. In the passenger seat rested a small wooden box, his mother's ashes, finally released by the coroner after the case had been closed. He parked near the construction site where the bracelet had been found, the place that had started everything again. The earth here was soft, pale, newly turned by machines, but older than memory. Ethan stepped out, the wind brushing gently against his face. He stood for a long time just listening, to the hum of the desert, to his own heartbeat, to the silence that was no longer empty, but full of everything he'd lost and found. When Lisa Carrington arrived, he didn't turn immediately. She walked up beside him, her footsteps quiet on the gravel. "You sure you want to do it here?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded. This is where she called out, even if no one heard her then. Feels right to let her rest where her voice finally came back. Lisa handed him a small folded flag she'd brought from the station. "From Sheriff Delgado," she said. "He wanted you to have it. Said she deserved something that lasts." Ethan smiled faintly, his eyes glistening. "He never gave up on her, did he?" "None of us did," Lisa replied. "Not really." He opened the box slowly, the ashes catching the morning light like dust motes in the sun. "I used to think justice meant revenge," he said quietly. "But it doesn't. It just means truth, even if it takes half a lifetime to find it." Lisa nodded. "Truth doesn't die. It just waits for someone to dig it up." He scattered the ashes into the wind, watching them drift and swirl, carried across the land his mother had once known. The motion was gentle, almost graceful, as if the desert itself was taking her home. For the first time since childhood, Ethan felt light, like the years of anger and grief were finally dissolving into the air. When it was done, he closed the box and whispered, "You're free now, Mum." They stood in silence for a while before Lisa spoke again. "What will you do now?" Ethan looked toward the horizon, where the road disappeared into the distance. "Live," he said simply. "For her. Maybe write about this someday. Tell her story the way it deserves to be told." She smiled. "Then you've already honored her." As they walked back to the car, the sky began to clear completely, streaks of gold and pink stretching over the mountains. Albuquerque glimmered faintly in the distance, a city changed, older, but still standing. Ethan turned to Lisa one last time. "You ever think about all the ones who never get their answers?" "Every day," she said, "but that's why we keep going. Because maybe one day someone else will pick up a case we left behind and give another family what you found today." He nodded, understanding. Back in his truck, he looked at the rearview mirror, the stretch of highway reflected behind him, endless and open. He whispered a quiet goodbye to the road that had taken so much and yet, in its own way, had given him back everything that mattered. As the wind swept across the sand, carrying away the last trace of Laura Henderson's name, her story didn't vanish. It became part of the land itself, part of the whispers that travel forever through the New Mexico desert. If this story moved you, subscribe to our channel for more true stories that uncover the forgotten echoes of America's past, and click the video on your screen now to keep watching. Justice waits, but it never fades.